"Take shelter here," the woman had said with such simple kindness, unaware that her offer to 15 Hells Angels would change her life forever. The bikers had nowhere else to go during the violent storm, accepting her hospitality with surprising gratitude. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The blizzard howled across the Colorado mountains with unforgiving fury, transforming the landscape into a ghostly white wasteland. Maria Johnson gripped the steering wheel of her ancient Chevy pickup, knuckles white with tension as she navigated the treacherous road leading to Evergreen. At 25, her face already showed lines that belonged to someone much older, the unmistakable marks of someone who had loved deeply and lost tragically. The truck's dashboard glowed with an alarming constellation of warning lights. The heater worked just enough to keep the windshield from freezing completely, but not enough to chase the chill from her bones. Maria glanced at the empty passenger seat beside her, the worn fabric still holding the impression of Thomas Johnson's larger frame. "Almost there," she whispered, as if her late husband could hear her. "Just a few more miles." The habit of talking to Thomas hadn't faded in the 18 months since his passing. Sometimes, she could almost hear his deep laugh in response, or feel the gentle pressure of his hand covering hers on the gearshift. Tonight, the silence that answered her felt particularly heavy, punctuated only by the wind's mournful wail and the truck's laboring engine. Maria squinted through the windshield as snowflakes swirled hypnotically in her headlights. The Midnight Haven Diner waited ahead, not just her business, but the embodiment of their shared dream. They had poured everything into that place, their savings, Thomas's military pension, and the modest inheritance from her grandmother. The diner represented their future, their legacy, their home. A tear slipped down her cheek as she remembered Thomas's enthusiasm when they'd first discovered the rundown building 3 years ago. "This is it, Maria," he'd said, eyes bright with possibility. "Our lighthouse for lost travelers." His Navy training had given him an appreciation for beacons of safety in treacherous conditions. The truck coughed ominously as she pushed it up the final hill. Through the curtain of white, she could just make out the diner's silhouette, a solitary structure standing defiant against the storm. No other vehicles dotted the normally busy parking lot. The weather had chased everyone indoors. Maria guided the struggling vehicle into its usual spot near the service entrance. For a moment, she sat motionless, gathering her strength for the night ahead. The foreclosure notice tucked in her coat pocket seemed to burn against her chest, a tangible reminder that she was 7 days away from losing everything. "I don't know how to save it," she confessed to Thomas's memory, her voice breaking. "I've tried everything." With a deep breath, Maria pushed open the truck door and stepped into the storm, the wind immediately tearing at her clothes and hair. The diner, their dream, their sanctuary, waited, its windows dark against the gathering night. The diner was nearly invisible beneath the relentless snowfall, its neon sign flickering weakly against the storm's fury. Only the faint red glow of Midnight Haven cut through the whiteout conditions, a desperate lighthouse in a sea of white. Maria Johnson's boots crunched through knee-deep drifts as she made her way to the entrance, each step a battle against the howling wind that threatened to knock her small frame sideways. Her frozen fingers fumbled with the keys, the metal biting cold against her skin. When the lock finally gave way, the bell above the door rang out, a cheerful sound that echoed through the emptiness, making the silence that followed even more profound. Inside, the ghosts of better times haunted every corner. Maria stood for a moment in the doorway, letting memories wash over her. The cracked red vinyl booths where truckers once swapped stories over endless cups of coffee now sat vacant and dull. The vintage jukebox, Thomas's pride and joy, stood silent in the corner, its chrome finish reflecting the dim emergency lights. She remembered how her husband had restored it piece by piece, spending evenings hunched over its mechanical heart until music once again filled their little sanctuary. Her gaze drifted to the service wall, a collection of framed photographs covering the far wall. Local veterans smiled back at her through time, men and women from Evergreen who had served their country. And there, in the center, Thomas's Navy portrait watched over Booth 4, his eyes forever young, his smile forever frozen in that moment before deployment, before the accident, before everything changed. Maria removed her snow-covered coat and hung it by the door, the weight of solitude settling on her shoulders. She was alone now, truly alone, with only the creaking of the old building as company. The foreclosure notice from Charles Blackwood's bank felt like a stone in her pocket, its official letterhead and cold language spelling the end of everything she and Thomas had built together. She pulled it out and placed it on the counter, smoothing its crumpled edges. 7 days. That's all the time she had left before Midnight Haven would become just another memory. The diner that had been a beacon for weary travelers, a meeting place for veterans, and the culmination of her grandmother's inheritance would soon be nothing more than an empty building on the side of the highway. Outside, the blizzard intensified, sealing her in with her thoughts and the remnants of a dream that was slipping through her fingers like the snow melting from her boots. Maria Johnson emptied her wallet onto the counter, arranging the crumpled bills and loose change with trembling fingers. $47.32, the pitiful sum that stood between her and complete financial ruin. The foreclosure notice from Charles Blackwood's bank had arrived yesterday, its formal language masking the simple truth. In 7 days, she would lose everything her husband had built. The ancient heating system coughed and sputtered, struggling against the bitter Colorado cold. Maria wrapped her cardigan tighter around her slender frame and moved toward the coffee machine, a ritual so deeply ingrained she could perform it blindfolded. Her hands worked automatically, measuring grounds, replacing the filter, filling the reservoir with water. The familiar gurgle and hiss provided little comfort tonight. "This is what Thomas loved most," she whispered to the empty diner, glancing at her late husband's Navy portrait hanging in booth 4. His smile remained frozen in time, a painful reminder of dreams interrupted. The Midnight Haven had been their shared vision, a sanctuary for travelers, a community hub for Evergreen's residents, a place where nobody went hungry, regardless of their ability to pay. The CB radio mounted beneath the counter crackled to life, startling her from her reverie. Highway 70 completely shut down from mile marker 215 to the junction. A disembodied voice announced through the static. Visibility 0. All vehicles advised to seek immediate shelter. Maria sighed, pouring herself a cup of the fresh coffee. No travelers meant no customers. No customers meant no income. The arithmetic was brutally simple. She wandered to the large front windows, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Outside, the blizzard had transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and hostile. Snow swirled in hypnotic patterns, illuminated briefly by the flickering neon of the diner's sign, before being swallowed again by darkness. The wind howled through tiny gaps in the weather stripping, creating an eerie, mournful sound that seemed to echo her despair. Maria slumped into a booth, cradling her mug between her palms, seeking warmth that went beyond physical comfort. At 25, she felt decades older, worn down by grief and struggle. She glanced around at the empty red vinyl booths, the vintage jukebox Thomas had restored himself, the service wall covered with photographs of local veterans. Each element represented a piece of their shared dream, a dream now collapsing under the weight of unpaid bills and dwindling hope. "What would you do?" she asked the photograph of Thomas, knowing no answer would come. The silence of the diner pressed in around her, broken only by the relentless storm and the ticking of the wall clock, counting down the minutes of what might be one of the Midnight Haven's final nights. Maria had just decided to give up for the night. Her fingers hovered over the light switch, ready to plunge the Midnight Haven diner into darkness when she heard it. A distant rumble, cutting through the howling wind. The sound was too deep, too rhythmic to be one of the county's snowplows. It pulsed with mechanical precision, growing louder with each passing second. She pressed her face against the frosted window, squinting into the blizzard. At first, there was only whiteness, but then yellow beams cut through the wall of snow. Not car headlights. They were too spread out, too numerous. Maria's breath caught in her throat as realization dawned. Motorcycles. In this weather, who would be crazy enough to ride in this storm? She whispered to the empty diner, her voice barely audible over the rattling windows. The rumble intensified until it vibrated through the floorboards. Through the curtain of white, Maria counted 15 massive bikes, materializing like apparitions, their riders hunched against the biting cold. The motorcycles formed a semicircle in front of the diner, their headlights illuminating the swirling snow in an almost otherworldly glow. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories about motorcycle clubs, some good, some terrifying. The thought of facing a group of them alone, in the dead of night, with the nearest neighbor miles away, sent cold fear trickling down her spine. She instinctively reached for her phone, but stopped. These weren't just random riders. They were people caught in the same merciless storm that had trapped half the county. The diner's neon sign had promised shelter, warmth, food. Could she really turn them away? Thomas's voice seemed to whisper in her ear. That diner isn't just about serving food, Maria. It's about being a lighthouse for people who need one. The riders dismounted, their bulky forms made even larger by heavy leather jackets and gear. Maria watched as they gathered, stomping boots against the ground to restore circulation. One rider, taller than the rest, pointed toward the diner's windows where her silhouette was clearly visible. Maria stepped back from the glass, her $47 suddenly feeling impossibly small against the prospect of feeding 15 hungry bikers. But something in their huddled postures, the way they leaned into each other against the wind, reminded her of soldiers in the field, people looking out for one another. She straightened her shoulders, remembering she was Maria Johnson, wife of Thomas Johnson, and this was their diner. Whatever came through that door, she would face it with the same courage that had sustained her through everything else. The lead rider dismounted, his boots crunching through the fresh powder as he approached the diner's entrance. Even through the frosted glass, Maria Johnson could make out his imposing figure. Tall, with distinguished gray streaks running through his hair, and a salt and pepper beard framing a weathered face. He knocked 3 times, each rap against the door deliberate and measured, conveying a respectful urgency that seemed at odds with the intimidating presence of 15 motorcycles idling in her parking lot. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood frozen behind the counter. The late-night news stories about motorcycle gangs flashed through her mind. Yet something in the man's posture, the way he stood back from the door, hands visible, waiting patiently in the brutal cold, spoke of discipline rather than threat. What would Thomas do? She whispered to herself, eyes drifting to booth 4, where her husband's Navy portrait smiled back at her. The memory of his voice came to her clearly, words he'd repeated throughout their marriage. Judge people by their actions, not appearances. Thomas had lived by that code, offering coffee to strangers and shelter to the lost. It was how they'd built Midnight Haven together, not just as a business, but as a refuge. Now, with the blizzard howling and the temperature plummeting dangerously, turning away travelers seemed unthinkable. The man knocked again, more urgently this time. Through the glass, she could see others huddled around their vehicles, shoulders hunched against the driving snow, exhaust clouds billowing around them. "They're just people caught in the storm," she murmured, gathering her courage. "Just like anyone else." Maria's fingers trembled as she approached the door, keys jingling in her unsteady hand. The lock clicked open, and she pulled the door inward, letting in a rush of frigid air and swirling snowflakes. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his rough appearance. "Sorry to disturb you so late. Roads are completely impassable, and we've got folks who can't handle much more of this cold. Would you consider letting us warm up? We can pay for whatever you're serving." Up close, Maria noticed the military bearing in his stance, the respect in his eyes, and the patch on his leather jacket indicating veteran status. Something in his demeanor reminded her of Thomas. The same quiet strength, the same careful consideration of others. Drawing a deep breath, Maria stepped aside and gestured toward the warmth of the diner. "Come in," she said, her voice finding unexpected steadiness. "All of you. There's coffee on, and I can make something hot to eat." With trembling hands but resolute heart, Maria welcomed the strangers inside, unaware that this simple act of compassion would change everything. The 15 bikers stomped into the diner, bringing with them a rush of cold air and the scent of leather and exhaust. Nathan Parker led the group, his imposing frame filling the doorway as he removed his helmet. His salt and pepper beard was frosted with ice crystals, and his weathered face showed signs of exhaustion beneath the tough exterior. "Ma'am, I can't thank you enough," Nathan said, extending a gloved hand toward Maria. "I'm Nathan Parker, president of the Thunder Ridge chapter. We got caught in this blizzard coming back from a memorial ride for one of our brothers." Maria Johnson shook his hand cautiously, her eyes darting between the men as they filed in. Despite their intimidating appearance, leather cuts covered in patches, heavy boots, and tattooed arms, she noticed how carefully they moved through her small diner, respectful of the space and mindful of their muddy boots on her clean floor. "We've been riding for hours trying to find shelter," Nathan continued, his voice softer than his appearance suggested. "All the motels are full, and the roads are becoming impassable. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate." The other riders nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of cold-induced pain and genuine gratitude. One man, older than the rest with a limp, sank gratefully into a booth, his breath coming out in visible puffs even inside the diner. "I can make coffee," Maria offered, moving toward the counter. "And I might have enough ingredients for some sandwiches." "That would be more than we could hope for," Nathan replied, removing his heavy gloves. His eyes caught sight of the service wall, lingering momentarily on the photographs of veterans. The bikers arranged themselves throughout the small space, some sliding into booths while others perched on stools at the counter. They spoke in hushed tones, conscious of being guests in this woman's establishment. Maria noticed how they kept their voices down, removed their bulkier gear, and placed it neatly by the door. As she worked the coffee machine, Maria observed the men more closely. Beneath their intimidating exterior, she saw signs of exhaustion and vulnerability, the same human needs that brought all travelers to her door. One younger rider with a Thunder Ridge patch rubbed his hands together, blowing on them to restore circulation. "It's not much," Maria said, as she placed a pot of coffee and stack of mugs on the counter. "But it's hot. Right now, that's everything," Nathan responded with genuine appreciation, pouring cups for his men before taking one for himself. "We won't forget this kindness, Ms. Johnson. Not many would open their doors to 15 bikers in the middle of a blizzard." As the warmth of the coffee spread through the diner, the tension in Maria's shoulders began to ease. These men might look dangerous, but tonight they were just travelers seeking shelter from the storm, not so different from anyone else who'd ever walked through her door. As the bikers settled in around the diner, the warmth from the heaters gradually thawed their frozen extremities. Maria Johnson observed details she'd missed in the chaos of their arrival. Military service patches adorned several leather jackets, some faded with age, others still vibrant despite the weathering. Their hands told stories too, calloused from years of labor, with scars and tattoos marking life's journey. Nathan Parker stood by the wall of photographs, his eyes fixed on one particular image. The service wall had been Thomas's pride, a collection of local veterans who'd found refuge in the Midnight Haven over the years. The biker's weathered face softened as he studied the photos, particularly lingering on one showing a young man in navy dress blues. "Is this him?" Nathan asked quietly, his finger hovering near Thomas's portrait. "Your husband?" Maria nodded, her throat tightening. "Yes, Thomas served 6 years before we opened this place." Nathan's eyes met hers with unexpected understanding. "Marines, myself, 2 tours in Afghanistan." He tapped his chest, where beneath his leather jacket, Maria could make out the outline of dog tags. "Never take these off." The confession opened a floodgate. A burly man with a gray beard at the counter raised one by one. Nearly 2/3 of the Thunder Ridge chapter revealed their military backgrounds: Navy, Coast Guard, Army Rangers, each sharing brief snippets of their service with respectful nods to the others. "Thomas would have loved this," Maria said, refilling Nathan's mug. "He always said the diner was meant to be a harbor for those who served." Nathan's eyes crinkled at the corners. "We recognize our own. There's something about the way a veteran moves in the world. Always scanning, always aware." He gestured toward the younger members of his group. "Some of these boys are still fighting battles, just not with guns anymore." Maria understood. She'd watched Thomas battle his own demons after returning home. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the struggle to find purpose in civilian life. The diner had been his anchor, his mission. "Loss has many faces," a quiet voice added. Daniel Brown, the youngest rider, spoke from the corner booth. "Some lose limbs, some lose sleep, some lose direction." His eyes met Maria's. "Thomas helped me find mine again when I was at my lowest." Maria hadn't known. Another thread connecting these strangers to her life, to Thomas's legacy. "He never mentioned it," she whispered. "The best ones never do," Nathan replied, raising his mug in silent toast to the man on the wall. The truth slipped out like a wounded animal. 7 days, Maria whispered, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. "That's all I have left before the bank takes everything." The weight of the confession seemed to settle across her shoulders as she pulled the crumpled foreclosure notice from her pocket and placed it on the counter. Nathan Parker's weathered face softened in the diner's dim light. The motorcycle club president leaned forward, his calloused hands wrapping around his steaming mug. "Sometimes the universe puts the right people in the right place at exactly the right time," he said, his voice carrying the gravitas of someone who'd seen both war and peace. "By morning, your kindness won't go unnoticed. That's a promise." Around the worn tables of Midnight Haven, the bikers began sharing stories, their voices low and reverent. Tommy Patterson, a burly man with tattoos covering his forearms, recounted how Maria had fed him for free when his truck broke down during a blizzard last winter. "I was stranded for 3 days," he explained. "This lady here kept me alive with hot meals and wouldn't take a dime." Another rider, his leather vest adorned with military patches, nodded. "2 years ago, my bike gave out on Highway 70. No phone, no cash. Maria let me use the diner phone and fed me while I waited for help." As the night deepened and the storm howled outside, more stories emerged. A veteran who'd found solace in Booth 4 under Thomas Johnson's watchful portrait. A trucker who'd been directed to medical help when he showed signs of a heart attack. A young family stranded with a sick child who'd been given shelter until help arrived. Maria listened in stunned silence. These were small acts of kindness she'd forgotten, moments that had seemed inconsequential to her, but had clearly meant everything to those she'd helped. Unknown to their host, Nathan slipped outside despite the raging blizzard. Standing in the shelter of the diner's overhang, he pulled out his phone. The president of Thunder Ridge made call after call, his voice urgent but determined as he explained the situation to fellow riders. veterans groups, and trucker networks across 3 states. "It's about the Midnight Haven," he said repeatedly into the device. "Maria Johnson needs us now. Spread the word." Inside, the warmth of shared humanity filled the space that had once felt so empty. Maria watched as these intimidating men, these strangers she'd feared, transformed into allies before her eyes, their stories weaving together a tapestry of connection she hadn't realized existed. "Thomas would be proud," one of the older riders said gently, nodding toward the service wall. For the first time in months, Maria felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. The storm howled against the windows, but inside the Midnight Haven diner, a different atmosphere had taken hold. The 15 bikers, their leather jackets now draped over chair backs, settled into the worn booths with mugs of steaming coffee clutched in weathered hands. Exhaustion lined their faces, yet there was a warmth in their eyes that transformed the space from a failing business into something sacred. Maria Johnson moved between tables, refilling cups and listening as the men began sharing stories she'd never expected to hear. These intimidating figures with their tattoos and gruff exteriors were recounting moments when she had touched their lives, moments she'd nearly forgotten. 2 years back, a biker with a gray-flecked beard said, "My rig broke down half a mile from here. Middle of winter, no money for repairs. You fed me for 3 days straight while I waited for parts." Maria remembered him vaguely, a trucker, not a biker then, but the gratitude in his eyes made her throat tighten. Another man spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "My daughter was in the hospital in Denver. Car died right outside. You let me use your phone, made me eat something while I waited for my brother to pick me up." He gestured to the booth by the window. "Sat right there, crying like a baby, and you just kept the coffee coming, never judged me once." The stories continued, each one revealing connections Maria hadn't realized she'd formed. A warm meal during a snowstorm, a kind word on a difficult anniversary, a moment of dignity offered when the world had turned cold. In the corner, a young man with haunted eyes who'd been silent until now cleared his throat. Daniel Brown looked no older than 22, his hands fidgeting with his cup. "I was going to end it all," he said quietly. "Had nothing left. No home, no hope. I came in here to get warm one last time before—" He swallowed hard. "You gave me a meal I couldn't pay for. Then you talked to me, really talked, asked me about myself like I mattered." The diner fell silent as Daniel looked directly at Maria. "You saved my life with a hamburger and 5 minutes of kindness. I never got to thank you." Nathan Parker, watching from the counter, saw something shift in Maria's expression, a realization dawning that her small acts of compassion had rippled outward in ways she'd never imagined. The diner wasn't just a building or business. It was a lighthouse for lost souls. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside, something powerful was taking root. A sanctuary born of simple human kindness, now returning when its keeper needed it most. While Maria prepared breakfast for her unexpected guests, Nathan Parker stepped outside into the still raging blizzard. The motorcycle club president pulled his leather jacket tighter against the biting cold and retrieved a satellite phone from his saddlebag. His weathered hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from determination. One by one, Nathan made calls that rippled across Colorado's network of veterans, truckers, and bikers. "It's the angel of Highway 70, he explained to each person. "Maria Johnson, the woman who's helped so many of us. She's about to lose everything." Inside the Midnight Haven diner, Maria remained oblivious to Nathan's mission as she flipped pancakes and brewed fresh coffee. The bikers exchanged knowing glances, but kept her distracted with stories and laughter. By 4 in the morning, Nathan returned, snow crusting his salt and pepper beard. He simply nodded to his brothers and warmed his hands over a mug of coffee. "Storm's letting up," he announced casually. "Roads should be clear by dawn." Maria smiled tiredly. "You'll all be able to get back on the road then?" "Yes," Nathan replied, his eyes twinkling. "And others will be able to get here." She didn't understand his meaning until the first pale light of dawn filtered through the frosted windows. Maria was wiping down the counter when Daniel Brown, the youngest of the bikers, called out from his position by the window. "You might want to see this," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Maria joined him at the window, her breath catching at the sight. Through the thinning snowfall, headlights appeared on the highway, first 2, then 5, then dozens more. Vehicles of every description wound their way toward the diner. Massive 18-wheelers with chains on their tires, pickup trucks flying American flags, cars packed with families, and a seemingly endless procession of motorcycles. "What is this?" she whispered, her hand pressed against the cold glass. Nathan stood beside her, his normally stern face softened with emotion. "This is what happens when you spend years being a lighthouse for others. Eventually, the light comes back to you." The parking lot filled rapidly as the convoy arrived. Maria recognized many faces. Truckers she'd fed when they were short on cash, veterans who'd found comfort in Booth 4 beside Thomas's photo, families she'd sheltered during previous storms. "I don't understand," Maria said, tears welling in her eyes as the vehicles continued to arrive. Nathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You opened your door to us last night when nobody else would. Now it's our turn to keep your door open." Tommy Patterson burst through the door, his 6'4" frame filling the entrance as snowflakes swirled around him. The trucker's weathered face broke into a smile when he spotted Maria behind the counter. Without hesitation, he crossed the diner in 3 long strides and wrapped her in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground. "You don't remember me, do you?" Tommy asked, setting her down gently. 3 years ago, my rig broke down 10 miles from here in weather worse than this. No money, no food for 2 days. You fed me, let me sleep in that booth over there, and wouldn't take a dime." Maria's eyes widened with recognition. "You left a $100 bill under the salt shaker when I wasn't looking." "Best investment I ever made," he said, turning to address the growing crowd behind him. "This woman saved my life that night." Within minutes, the Midnight Haven transformed from a nearly empty diner to a buzzing hive of activity. The red vinyl booths filled with truckers sharing stories of Maria's kindness. The counter space disappeared beneath a mountain of dollar bills as people emptied their wallets. In the corner, Nathan organized volunteers into shifts, his military efficiency bringing order to the chaos. "I've got 6 guys who can fix that roof," announced a bearded man in a leather vest. "Materials are already on the way." Clara from the bakery arrived with trays of fresh bread, setting them on any available surface. "Consider this the first of many deliveries," she said, squeezing Maria's hand. A young mother approached shyly, her little boy hiding behind her legs. "You probably don't remember us," she whispered. "Last winter, our car broke down. You gave us hot chocolate and called Sheriff Hawkins, to help us." The sheriff himself stood by the jukebox, nodding in confirmation as he dropped coins into the machine. Soon, the sounds of Johnny Cash filled the diner, competing with the laughter and animated conversations. Daniel Brown, once a lost soul Maria had helped, now moved confidently among the crowd, collecting donations in a weathered cowboy hat. "We're at $4,000 and counting," he announced, his voice steady with purpose. Maria found herself at the center of it all, alternating between serving coffee and accepting hugs from strangers who insisted they weren't strangers at all. Each person had a story, a meal provided, a kind word offered, a moment of compassion when they needed it most. Tommy climbed onto a chair, his voice booming over the crowd. "The Midnight Haven saved us when we needed shelter. Now it's our turn to save it." The cheer that followed shook snow from the eaves, a sound of hope drowning out the storm's fury. Nathan Parker orchestrated the growing crowd with the precision of his Marine Corps training. He divided the bikers, truckers, and local volunteers into teams, each with clear responsibilities. Some cleared snow from the parking lot, others repaired the flickering neon sign, while a group of Thunder Ridge members handled security, ensuring the growing excitement remained orderly. "We need more tables set up outside," Nathan called out, his salt and pepper beard frosted with snowflakes. "Tommy, can you get your buddies to bring those tarps from your rig?" Tommy Patterson nodded eagerly, rallying several fellow truckers to create an impromptu shelter extension outside the diner's walls. The trucker's enthusiasm was infectious as he shared how Maria had once given him a free meal and let him sleep in his truck in the parking lot during a blizzard 3 years ago. Maria Johnson stood behind the counter, hands trembling as she poured coffee for the 20th time that morning. The young woman could barely process the transformation happening around her. Just hours ago, she'd been counting her last $47, preparing to lose everything. Now, the Midnight Haven buzzed with more life than it had seen since Thomas passed away. "Your husband would be so proud," whispered Clara, sliding another tray of freshly baked goods onto the counter. The baker had closed her own shop to help, bringing everything she could carry through the snow. Smartphones appeared everywhere, capturing the growing miracle. A trucker from Wyoming posted a video of the motorcycle convoy arriving through the storm. A local teacher shared photos of veterans embracing in front of the service wall. Within hours, the hashtag Midnight Haven was trending across Colorado. Daniel Brown, once a lost soul Maria had fed when he couldn't pay, now worked tirelessly alongside the bikers. "She saved my life," he told anyone who would listen. "Now we save her diner." By noon, the parking lot resembled a festival ground. Pickup trucks formed a protective circle around the property. An impromptu stage had been assembled where people shared stories of how the Midnight Haven and Maria herself had touched their lives. A reporter from Denver arrived, capturing footage of the spontaneous community rising from the snow. "They're calling you the Angel of Highway 70, she told Maria, who blushed deeply at the title. Nathan watched from beside the jukebox, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. The diner wasn't just being saved. It was being reborn as something greater. A sanctuary, a lighthouse, the very thing Thomas Johnson had dreamed it could be. As word spread through the mountains, more vehicles appeared on the horizon, their headlights cutting through the lingering snow like beacons answering a call. The diner buzzed with newfound energy, but not everyone in Evergreen welcomed the sudden transformation. Shortly after noon, Charles Blackwood arrived in his polished sedan, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the worn leather jackets and work clothes filling the parking lot. The bank manager's thin lips pressed into a hard line as he surveyed the unexpected crowd, foreclosure documents clutched tightly in his manicured hand. Sheriff Jim Hawkins accompanied him, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his official capacity. The lawman's weathered face betrayed his conflicted loyalties as they pushed through the throng toward the entrance. "Maria Johnson," Charles called out, his voice cutting through the cheerful din. "I have papers to serve." The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing Maria behind the counter. Her eyes, bright with purpose just moments before, now clouded with apprehension. Nathan stepped protectively to her side, his imposing presence a silent challenge. "This establishment is in default," the banker continued, holding up the documents. "I'm authorized to begin immediate foreclosure proceedings." Before anyone could respond, a tall figure in a state police uniform stepped forward. Lieutenant William Davis removed his hat respectfully, his posture military straight. "Mr. Blackwood," the officer said, "I'm invoking emergency shelter provisions under state law. This diner is currently housing stranded travelers during a declared weather emergency." Charles scoffed. "The storm has passed. These people could leave if they wanted." "Not according to highway reports," William countered, pulling out his phone to display road closure notifications. "And as the ranking state officer present, my determination stands." The banker's face flushed with frustration. "This is temporary at best. The foreclosure is inevitable." Sheriff Hawkins, who had remained silent, suddenly cleared his throat. "Charles, could I have a word?" He guided the banker to a quiet corner, speaking in hushed tones. "You know, my boy Jason went through that rough patch after his mother died," the sheriff said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thomas Johnson was the one who talked him down when he was at his lowest. Gave him purpose, a job fixing up this place on weekends." He gestured around the diner. "This isn't just a business, Charles." The banker's expression softened slightly, his eyes darting to the service wall where dozens of photographs told silent stories of compassion and community. Nathan approached, extending a calloused hand. "We're not asking for charity, Mr. Blackwood. We're asking for time to make this right." Charles hesitated, looking from the sheriff to the determined faces surrounding him. Outside, more vehicles were arriving, each one carrying someone whose life had been touched by the little diner and its owners. 48 hours, he finally conceded. "Then we talk terms." Maria nodded, relief washing over her features. It wasn't victory, but it was a beginning. News vans lined the parking lot of the Midnight Haven Diner, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal flowers. Reporters clutched microphones with gloved hands, capturing the extraordinary scene unfolding in Evergreen. What had begun as a desperate night in a snowstorm was transforming into something that transcended the small Colorado town. Clara arrived before sunrise, her arms laden with fresh-baked bread and steaming containers of homemade soup. "My grandmother always said food feeds more than the body," she told Maria, setting up an impromptu serving station near the counter. The aroma of sourdough and chicken broth filled the air, providing comfort amid the chaos. The hardware store owner, a quiet man who'd barely spoken 2 words to Maria in years, unloaded boxes of tools, light bulbs, and repair supplies from his truck. "Thomas helped me fix my roof once," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Wouldn't take a dime." Evergreen High's football team formed a human chain, passing bottled water from trucks to the diner. Their coach barked instructions while secretly wiping away tears when he thought no one was looking. These teenagers, usually concerned with games and grades, worked tirelessly, understanding instinctively that they were part of something momentous. As the day progressed, Nathan gathered everyone inside. The tall biker stood beside Maria, his weathered face solemn as he unrolled large blueprints across the counter. The room fell silent. "These belong to Thomas," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "He called it Project Lighthouse." Maria stared at the detailed drawings, her hands trembling as she traced her late husband's handwriting. The plans showed the diner at the center of a sprawling complex, dormitories for veterans in need, a garage for travelers' repairs, communal spaces, and a literal lighthouse tower rising from the back of the property. "He shared these with me 2 weeks before he passed," Nathan continued. "Asked me to help when the time was right. Said it needed to be a beacon for lost souls." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I never knew," she whispered. Nathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. He was gathering support quietly, getting commitments from contractors, veterans groups, even some government programs. The man had vision. Daniel Brown, standing nearby, nodded in understanding. "That's why he always asked me about my construction experience when I'd stop in." The room buzzed with renewed purpose as people examined the blueprints. What had begun as a rescue mission for one woman's diner was evolving into something far greater. A community rising to fulfill a fallen hero's dream, piece by piece, heart by heart. Maria looked around at the faces surrounding her. Bikers, truckers, townspeople, all united by her husband's vision and her simple act of opening a door during a storm. The Midnight Haven Diner became the epicenter of a movement that spread faster than the winter storm outside. Donations flooded in from every corner of the state and beyond. 3 Hells Angels chapters from neighboring states pledged $20,000 collectively, their representatives arriving with leather-bound envelopes stuffed with cash. Maria Johnson could hardly believe her eyes as she counted bill after bill. "This is what brotherhood means," one tattooed writer explained, his weathered face softening. "You sheltered our brothers when they needed it most." Tommy Patterson organized the truckers, who passed collection hats through truck stops across 5 states. When the final count came in, they had doubled their initial goal, raising over $30,000 in small bills and heartfelt notes. The burly man beamed with pride as he presented the funds to Maria, his eyes misty with emotion. "Highway family takes care of its own," he said simply. Local officials, sensing the groundswell of public support, made unprecedented moves. The town council unanimously passed an emergency resolution to stall any development permits that might threaten the diner. Mayor Wilson personally delivered the news, standing awkwardly among the bikers and truckers who now filled the establishment. "Evergreen needs places like this," she admitted, "places with heart." As the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, Nathan Parker approached Maria with a weathered envelope. His expression was solemn as he handed it to her. "Thomas gave me this before his last deployment," the motorcycle club president explained quietly. "Made me promise to keep it safe until you needed it most." With trembling fingers, Maria opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in her husband's familiar handwriting, and a deed to 10 acres of land directly behind the diner. Thomas had purchased it in secret, using his military savings and a small inheritance from his uncle. "My lighthouse needs room to shine," Thomas had written. "This land is our future, our legacy. No developer can ever take it from you now." Maria pressed the paper to her chest, tears streaming down her face. All around her, the diner hummed with activity, volunteers cleaning, planning, dreaming. The land her husband had secured would ensure that Midnight Haven could expand into the vision he'd always held. "He knew," she whispered to Nathan. "Somehow he knew this day would come." The biker nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding. "Good men often see farther than the rest of us." Outside, the roar of more motorcycles announced new arrivals, each one bringing resources, skills, and determination to the cause that had united them all. With the deed clutched in her hands, Maria Johnson approached the bank with a newfound confidence. The document wasn't just paper. It was Thomas's final gift, a shield against the forces that threatened to erase their dream. The Midnight Haven's parking lot remained packed with supporters as she entered the imposing brick building where Charles Blackwood awaited. The bank manager's office felt cold and sterile compared to the warmth of her diner. Charles sat rigid behind his mahogany desk, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. But it wasn't Charles who surprised Maria. It was the presence of his son, Richard Blackwood, standing by the window in a crisp suit that couldn't hide the military bearing in his posture. "I believe we have matters to discuss," Charles began, sliding the foreclosure papers forward. "The situation remains unchanged from a financial perspective." Maria placed Thomas's deed on the desk. "Actually, it has changed considerably. My husband secured its investment in community. Look outside. Those people aren't just supporters. They're customers, clients, voters. They're watching what happens here today." Richard nodded. "Horizon can provide architectural support, materials at cost. We turn this into a public-private partnership that benefits everyone." For several moments, Charles stared at the deed, then at his son. The older man's shoulders finally relaxed, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. "I'll need to see a business plan," he said, his tone softer, "and community commitments in writing." Maria smiled. "Nathan's already working on it. We'll have it to you by tomorrow." As they shook hands, Charles added, "I'll speak with the board about reassessing our approach to development in Evergreen. Perhaps we've been short-sighted." Outside, Maria shared the news with Nathan and the waiting crowd. The banker's son, a veteran himself, had become an unexpected ally in their fight. One more engine had joined their convoy of hope, proving that sometimes bridges could be built in the most unlikely places. Governor James Williams arrived at the Midnight Haven Diner with minimal fanfare but maximum impact. The tall, silver-haired politician stepped out of his modest sedan, refusing the usual security detail that accompanied his official visits. He remembered Maria Johnson well. 3 years earlier, during a grueling campaign tour through the mountains, she had offered him a cup of coffee and a sympathetic ear when his convoy broke down in a snowstorm. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses leave the deepest marks. the governor announced to the gathered crowd, his voice carrying across the property. What Maria offered me was dignity when I needed it most. The governor's endorsement transformed the grassroots movement into something officially sanctioned. Within hours, his office had expedited paperwork for state grants targeting veteran rehabilitation and rural community development. The regulatory hurdles that might have taken months to navigate were cleared with remarkable efficiency. News vans from Denver, Colorado Springs, and even national networks lined the road leading to the diner. Maria, uncomfortable with the spotlight but determined to honor Thomas's vision, gave interviews that touched hearts across America. Nathan Parker stood beside her during each one, his steady presence giving her strength when words failed. "This isn't about saving one business," Maria told a CNN reporter. "It's about remembering that we're all just travelers needing a light to guide us home sometimes." By sunset, Maria climbed the gentle slope behind the diner, where volunteers had already begun clearing ground for the first buildings. The property stretched before her, 10 acres of possibility that Thomas had secretly secured. She could see the foundations being marked for veterans' housing, the frame of a garage where Daniel and other former servicemen would teach trade skills, and the community garden already taking shape under Clara's direction. At the highest point of the land, workers had poured the concrete base for what would become the project's namesake, a functioning lighthouse, visible from the highway and across the valley. Richard Blackwood, surprising everyone with his engineering expertise, stood with blueprints, directing the construction team with unexpected passion. "He would have loved this," Nathan said quietly, joining Maria on the hillside. "Thomas always saw further than the rest of us." Maria nodded, watching as Lieutenant Davis helped unload building materials from Tawny Patterson's truck. Even Sheriff Hawkins had brought his son to volunteer, the young man's recovery a testament to second chances. "I never understood why he named it Project Lighthouse," Maria admitted, her eyes on the bustling activity below. "But I do now. It's not just about guiding people here. It's about helping them find their way forward." The setting sun cast long shadows across what would soon become a beacon of hope for countless travelers, lost souls, and veterans seeking community. In her heart, Maria knew that Thomas had been building this lighthouse all along, brick by brick, soul by soul. 6 months after that fateful snowstorm, Project Lighthouse had transformed from a desperate dream into a thriving reality. The once struggling Midnight Haven Diner now stood at the heart of a sprawling community center that had become a national model for veteran support and traveler assistance. Maria Johnson walked the grounds each morning, still amazed by what they'd accomplished. Where once there had been only her small diner and empty land, now stood transitional housing for veterans, a community garden bursting with vegetables, and a training center where former military personnel learned new skills. "We've helped over 300 veterans find housing since we opened," Nathan Parker told a visiting journalist, his silt and pepper beard now neatly trimmed as he conducted tours of the facility. The former Marine moved with purpose through the grounds, pointing out the solar panels that powered the complex and the meditation garden where many found peace. Daniel Brown had perhaps undergone the most remarkable transformation. Once a lost soul saved by Maria's simple kindness, he now ran the trucker training program with quiet confidence. "We teach logistics, maintenance, and certification," he explained to a group of new recruits, his eyes bright with purpose. "But most importantly, we teach community. No one drives alone when they're part of Midnight Haven." The program had already placed 78 veterans in good-paying trucking jobs, creating a network of support that stretched across the country's highways. Truckers who graduated from Daniel's program became ambassadors, spreading word of the sanctuary in Evergreen to others in need. Even Charles Blackwood had found redemption in the project's success. The bank manager who once wielded foreclosure notices now helped veterans secure loans for homes and businesses. "My son Richard helped me see what was truly important," he admitted during a community meeting, his voice humbled by the transformation around him. The diner itself remained the heart of it all. Maria still served coffee at the counter each morning, preserving the warmth and welcome that had started everything. The service wall had expanded to cover an entire room, filled with photographs of those who'd found shelter and purpose at the lighthouse. Nathan and Maria had become partners in every sense, their shared dedication to Thomas Johnson's vision creating a bond that sustained them through challenges. Together they carried the torch that Thomas had lit, turning personal tragedy into community triumph. "This isn't just about helping people in crisis," Maria told a group of visitors from another state hoping to replicate their model. "It's about creating a place where everyone belongs, where no one gets left behind." She glanced at Thomas's portrait, still hanging in booth 4, and smiled. That's what taking shelter really means. The mountain winds whispered gently around Midnight Haven Diner as the community gathered on the one-year anniversary of the snowstorm that had changed everything. Strings of lights twinkled overhead, transforming the once struggling establishment into something magical. Where there had once been emptiness and despair, now stood hundreds of people, bikers in leather cuts, truckers with weathered faces, veterans standing tall, and even politicians in rolled-up sleeves. Maria Johnson trembled behind the makeshift podium, her fingers clutching note cards she wouldn't need. Public speaking had always terrified her, but Nathan Parker gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before stepping back. The former Marine's presence had become her anchor in the whirlwind year that had passed. "A year ago," she began, her voice initially faint before finding strength, "I was counting $47 and wondering how to say goodbye to everything my husband had built." She gestured toward Thomas's Navy portrait, still watching over booth 4. "I didn't know that opening a door to 15 strangers would change everything." The crowd grew silent as Maria recounted that night, the howling blizzard, the rumble of motorcycles, and the moment she chose compassion over fear. She spoke of Thomas's secret vision for Project Lighthouse, now a reality surrounding them, and how a community had risen from the ashes of her despair. "My husband used to say that kindness is the only investment that never fails," she continued, her eyes finding Daniel Brown in the crowd. The young man who had once been lost now stood tall among the trucker training program graduates. "I've seen that truth in action every day since." Lieutenant William Davis nodded from where he stood with Sheriff Jim Hawkins, both men remembering how they'd helped stall the foreclosure. Even Charles Blackwood was present. Standing somewhat awkwardly beside his son Richard, their relationship transformed through their involvement with the project. Tommy Patterson, the trucker whose life Maria had once saved, wiped tears openly as she acknowledged how every person present had contributed something irreplaceable to the miracle around them. Clara from the bakery beamed from beside her display of celebration cakes, each one decorated with tiny lighthouses. "We built this together," Maria said, her voice steady now. "Not just buildings and programs, but a community that refuses to let anyone stand alone in this film." She raised her coffee mug in a toast. "To open doors, to second chances, and to the light we keep burning for each other." As applause thundered across the grounds, Nathan stepped forward to stand beside her, their shoulders touching lightly, partners in preserving Thomas's legacy. Maria's words had done more than commemorate an anniversary. They had renewed the covenant between all those present, a promise to continue what that snowy night had begun. As dusk fell, the newly constructed lighthouse cast its powerful beam across the snow-covered mountains surrounding Evergreen. The light swept through the darkness, visible for miles, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of a single act of kindness. Inside the Midnight Haven Diner, the heart of what had become Project Lighthouse, Maria Johnson moved with practiced ease behind the counter, pouring steaming coffee for faces both familiar and new. "Never thought I'd see the day," Nathan Parker said, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug. The former Marine's eyes crinkled with pride as he watched Maria work. Thomas would be proud. She nodded, emotion catching in her throat as she glanced at booth 4, where her late husband's Navy portrait still hung. The photograph seemed to glow in the warm light of the diner, his smile a benediction over everything they'd built. Daniel Brown, once a lost soul saved by Maria's compassion, now moved confidently among the tables, sharing stories of the trucker training program with potential recruits. His transformation mirrored the diner's own, from the brink of extinction to a thriving community center. The jukebox played softly in the corner, its vintage melodies mingling with laughter and conversation. Even Charles Blackwood sat at the counter, the bank manager's initial hostility replaced by grudging respect as he discussed expansion plans with his son, Richard. "We could add another wing by spring," Richard suggested, spreading blueprints across the countertop. "The veterans' housing is already at capacity." Clara arrived with fresh-baked bread, the aroma filling the space with homey comfort. Sheriff Hawkins and Lieutenant Davis sat together, their uniforms a reminder that community extended to those who served in all capacities. The distant rumble came first, a low thunder that grew steadily louder. Maria exchanged a knowing glance with Nathan before moving to the window. Outside, headlights pierced the mountain darkness as a convoy of motorcycles approached. Not 15 this time, but 100 strong. They came from chapters across the country, their chrome gleaming under the lighthouse beam, leather jackets emblazoned with patches from every state. The riders dismounted in practiced unison, forming a line of respect before entering. Tommy Patterson held the door as they filed in, each nodding to Maria with the reverence reserved for someone who had changed their world. Standing behind her counter, Maria felt Thomas's presence more strongly than ever. What had begun with a simple choice, opening a door during a blizzard rather than turning away, had become something immortal, a beacon guiding travelers home. In the glow of that light, surrounded by the family she'd found, Maria knew they had built something that would outlast them all, a testament to the power of kindness, one cup of coffee, one open door at a time.